Hello, ma'am.
তুমি তাহলে লাউটা ওটা করে নাও তাড়াতাড়ি।
হ্যাঁ, লাউটা করছি আর ডালটা আমার হয়ে গেছে ছানতে আমার।
Welcome back. We will now begin the third plenary session of the conference, and the link for joining through Google Meet is available in the schedule. I request Professor B. Hariharan to moderate the session as the chairperson. Professor B. Hariharan is the head of the department at Institute of English, University of Kerala. We have Srimati Anita Gupta Hembrom and Professor Julie Banerjee Mehta as speakers for this session. Over to you, Professor Hariharan.
Thank you for that. We have running late a little bit, but I think we'll get about an hour, 12 o'clock to 1 o'clock, so 30 minutes each. We've had an exciting session this morning, a lot of discussion, a lot of talks, and I'm sure the third plenary session will be the icing on the cake. So we all look forward to both the presentations. So I'm very happy to invite Dr. Anita Hembrom from Madhupur College to make her presentation. Over to you.
Thank you, sir. It is a pleasure to be on this side of this table. Once upon a time, I was a student here as a MPhil scholar and PhD scholar. So I thank my teachers a lot for giving me this opportunity. And also, Hariharan sir, being my chairperson, brings back the memory of school days when all of our teachers were Malayali and we always try to learn Malayalam like young varate, sugamane, sugamtane. So it's also that, yes, it's easygoing. But yeah, uh, until yesterday, everything seemed so easy in my head that I could speak. But now I think after listening to so much of exciting and interesting lectures, I think if I can make out something, and I'll keep this paper very personal, which is from my understanding, which you said that how you read. So how I have read my literature, my community, and I will keep it multilingual if that's okay. And but my very first observation when I came to this conference was this blackboard painting. So for very first, I would just like to know that who are the persons who drew this drawing. Yes, can I have a question with that? I would just like to know that what was in your mind when you drew this drawing. Then I can stand.
About the topic was introduced to us, and I after I heard about the topic and I read the topic, uh, I tried to paint an image about the topic. So I tried to show a story of the topic so that I could not need to write the topic on the board, but through my image or through my picture I describe it through the painting.
Thank you. That is very interesting because when I saw this drawing, uh, uh, Ram Dayal Munda, he was a Munda writer. You can see his words came up in my mind. This one I can interpret that Je nachi se bachi, nachoge to bachoge. That is the mool adhar of an indigenous identity. You survive when you enjoy your culture. Second, again, this was the history of exploitation and suffering and resistance, which is again the very much history of my community as well. Son. And the third is that your daily life, that how you survive within your daily life. And I can interpret this whole drawing as Jal, Jungle and Jameen, the three J's with which the Adivasis of India has always been living. And that is one of the basic idea that why the need for a literature, because Adivasi literature, Adivasi culture has always been a very rich culture. They had their folk literature in forms of songs, all those oralities. But why the need to bring it down in a written form? And I would start that with a song. If I can sing it very well, I don't know. But again, that is a lakchar setting. That means cultural setting, which is by Raghunath Murmu. So he goes on like that. All mena tama thorum mena tama rod mena tama amho mena. All adlere rodem adlere thorum adlere amhom adom. Ama duvar lagit ama ura lagit jahai do bainala amginyala. Ama jati lagit ama somaj lagit jahai do bainala amginyala. Which means that it brings us to the need that why we want a literature. Here Raghunath Murmu says, if you have your culture, if you have your language, all means here language, it means you have literature. If you have your religion, that means you exist. Your existence are dependent on your language, literature, on your culture, on your religion. And it is not the other, but it is from within that we have to make efforts to survive. And that is through this, again, the very need of literature. So I will start, I'm already starting, that keep in mind again with the geographical locations and also the emergence of literature. I will speak it in a very simple form in like storytelling. Because Santhali literature as we now know it still is again written in so many scripts and language also. We have now seen, we are seeing emergence of Santhali writers who are writing in English, who are writing in Hindi, who are writing in Bengali, Odia, and also with that, there are other stream of writers who are writing in Santhali. And again, the use of scripts are so many, very versified. And at one point of time, it seemed like a boom, that the literature was flourishing. But now that very boom seems to be like a curse. That's why I have termed this as is indigenous literature and endangered. By endangered, I do not denote that it is going extinct, but that somehow it will cease to enjoy the importance which it is enjoying at the present scenario. The Santhali literature, which we know, it emerged at a time when the first the missionaries, they came to us and they had their interaction. Why, when Raghunath Murmu says that we need a language, we need a dharam, we need we need a rod of our own, that language, literature, and religion of our own. Because that was the missionary period from the early 19th century to the early 20th century was a phase when all these three items of the very aspects of culture was being sabotaged, I can say. Why? Because as compared to other indigenous languages of Jharkhand, mostly I will speak about Jharkhand, which is Kuruk, Kharia, those languages are indigenous languages. And few are particularly vulnerable. Why? Because their languages was being forgotten when they had this contact with the missionaries. But what was happening with Santhal people was that the missionaries, they emphasized that no single Santhal children would go away without learning Santhali. They should learn Santhali, they will have to speak Santhali, but what would be the subject matter? It would be the subject matter of their culture. You have to learn Christianity in Santhali. You don't have to learn your culture in Santhali. You have to learn Bible in Santhali. You don't have to learn about Marang Buru in Santhali. So through that was a thing that through their language, through the script, something else was being given to them. Where we see that the Santals, because most of them were not educated at the time, they were merely subject matters. They were subjects, they were not readers, and they were receptors. But when we see the phase, and this was all happening when it was almost just Bengal presidency. There was no different geographical locations of Santals as such. But when the first historical movement, which we see, Santhal Hul, 1855, that comes up, we see that Santhal for the first time gains their geographical location, which is Santhal Pargana, which now comes under Jharkhand. And, but again, that was still under Bengal presidency. With independence, during the independence struggle, India was struggling for freedom, and also the Adivasis were struggling for a state of their own, which from Santhal, from Bengal presidency, to an extent they came to Santhal Pargana. Again, when Bengal and Bihar was separated from Bengal presidency, they came into now Bihar, Bengal, and Santhal Pargana being under Bihar. So again, their languages was diversified along with Santhali. They knew other languages, Bengali, Odia, and that's why they were so multilingual. And their literature, so that was, they wrote that thing in multi-scripts. Again, we situate when we, again, the Jharkhand movement, when it comes up, we see that with Jharkhand movement, the literature, it comes very much. I would, again, this is a Nagpuri song. I will just, because with songs I think I can explain much better that why literature, culture movement and movement of a state was so important to them, and it was going hand in hand. So this was a song which came up during 1970s and 1980s, and this is also one of the popular song of resistance, which we can say, and it's very popular, and it was composed by Madhu Mansoor Hansmukh in Nagpuri language, which he says that बांध बना ले, गांव डुबा ले, कारखाना बना ले, जंगल काटी, खदान खोदी, सेंचुरी बना ले, जल जंगल जमीन छोड़ हमें कहाँ कहाँ जाए, विकास के भगवान बता अब कैसे जान बचाए, गांव छोड़ब नहीं, जंगल छोड़ब नहीं, माए माटी छोड़ब नहीं, लड़ाई छोड़ब नहीं. So the urgency for Jal, Jangal and Jameen, because the historical movement of Santhal Hul was mostly about this, the exploitation, the social struggle, the religious struggles which Santhal as well as other communities were going through. So they felt until and unless I have a location, I have a space of my own, my survival, my existence is very, very critical. And with that also, that we also need to have a language. You have a language, but we need to capture it in a written form. Only then how, why? To reach as much as the population. So during the Jharkhand movement, we see that many journals come up, Adivasi, Hor Samvad, where writers, both Santhal and non-Santhal, they were writing in Santhali, again script being different. In Jharkhand, mostly Bihar, it was the Nagari script. In Bengal, it was the Bengali script. In Odisha, it was the Odia script. But the main essence was to have a literature on one's own. Why? Because when after independence, in 1953, when state reformation committee was formed, Jharkhand state's formation was denied on the basis that Jharkhand neither has a tribal population and neither it has a language of its own or literature of its own. So those were the prerequisites of having a state. That state means that you have to have a language of your own. You need to have a vast, a reservoir of literature, which at that point of time, none of the Adivasi communities had. Their language was very much oral. So we see that the demand for, or the urgency for Jal, Jangal and Jameen gave birth to writers in different communities, not just Santhal, but the local, the very regional people. Jharkhand has so many literatures because it has so many languages, apart from Adivasi languages. So during that time, the Kuruk literature of Unnao people, the Kharia literature of Kharia people, the Munda literature of Mundari, the Panch Pargania, which is a very local language, Panch Pargania, Khota, Nagpuri, these all things, literatures were emerging, and they were demanding a state of their own. State means security in so many forms. That you will have a social security, you will have a security of job, you will have a culture security. But we see that they were awarded the state, which now as Jharkhand is known as that Jharkhand to ban gaya, but it suffers from its own resource curse. That because Jharkhand occupies around 40% of the mineral resources of India, but it has not been able to utilize any of those resources, and the people, they still live below poverty line. And that is also the condition of the literature, that humne literature to bana liya. We have a literature of our, we have a script, our language has been recognized by 8th schedule. But those very, this urgency is the crisis which led to the emergence of literature, and the abundance of creativity during this now seems to be in conflict with one another. Why? Because I'm saying this because for the perspective as a researcher and also someone belonging to this culture. Again, my position is not that I am extremely into this culture. I'm someone who has a cultural identity, a certificate of this community, but a person who seldom have lived this life, the life of this community. This was a occasional life for me. Occasional life in the sense that just going during holidays, during festivals. So this was an occasional life for me. My mainstream life is the life of the mainstream people. So I have a standpoint where I can also see it as a person belonging to this community and also a person who is outside this community at the same time. And I think that gives me some liberty to analyze it somehow better than the other persons. I think so. It is my very personal understanding. So what we see is that the literature at present, literature, not just Santali literature, but the literature, other Adivasi literatures are also suffering from this very, again, a conflict that what should be now the medium of writing. Because you had Odia script, you had Bengali script, you had a Nagari script, you had Roman script, and same goes for the Kharia literature, for the Urao literature, for Nagpuri literature. Everyone had that same, because that was the need of the time. कि आपको किसी भी हालत में जो है आपको दिखाना है कि नहीं, something, we have something. It is, you don't just not your literature, your culture is rich enough. My own culture is also rich enough, and that I will show through the medium of writing. That was the urgency, the very need of that time. And but now that you have gained that cultural identity, that state identity, but now the question remains that every one of us, the 7 billion population of India known as Santhal, we are Santhal. We are Santhal by our racial definition. But again, not every Santhal is a Jharkhandi. Not every Santhal is a Sarna. Not every Santhal is a Christian. And for that matter, not every Santhal is Indian. So you have so varied, I would say, sub-identities which need to be amalgamated together. And now the writers, the people who are on the forefront of saving the culture, saving the literature, they are of the idea that the indigenous script of one's own culture can save us from having this multi-identities. And the script can bind us in one identity, and Alchiki being the one. Before going to that, I would say that whatever I speak, I have no biasness or political inclination, because when we talk of Adivasi literatures, mostly located in certain states, politics takes the forefront and creativity is always secondary. Because always the politics is going to say you that what you need to write and what you should not need to write. That one example being that Sovendra Sekhar has the, I hope, because he writes in English, most of readers are aware with him, that his writings had been very much, it was rejected by the readers, by Santhali readers at large, by Adivasi readers at large. And even he, by profession, he's a doctor, and even the state government was forced to suspend him from job. Why? Because he wrote something which would not relate or was not according to the mindset of this community. So, and again, now people, some people like the writers of Odisha and West Bengal. Odisha has very well adopted the Alchiki script. Alchiki means the writing script, but all, the word all has a ritualistic meaning. All is a drawing which is mostly drawn during a Sohrai festival and during marriage ceremonies where the worship takes place. So all has that divinity in it, and that's why the term Alchiki. The people of Odisha have well adopted, the government has well adopted. In West Bengal, it has been well adopted, and Vishwabhati being the first central university, and it is the only central university which has Santhali department where Alchiki is the medium of writing. But when we come to Jharkhand, we see that they have certain disagreements. People over there, because when this writing form came into being, people over there were well acquainted with the Roman script and the Nagari script. Now, in people, people in Jharkhand are divided over their viewpoints. Some say that Nagari is the best way to express writer literature, being given the spellings or the syntax and what the linguistic behavior. Some are in the favor that Roman is the best way because the missionaries had well developed that script with all syntax, and that can very well fit into writing the literature. Whereas others say that no, Alchiki is the best way. Why? Because it connects us to our divinity. It is something which was lost at a given point of time, and it has been reinverted by Pandit Raghunath Murmu, which Pandit Raghunath Murmu also says in his stories that it was given to him by Bidu and Chandan. He now terms them as deities of knowledge. So now the thing happens that when we still have such conflicts over scripts, how can we make a literature survive? Because again, given the script which you support will be the books which you will support. For example, mostly I did till 2020, whatever I saw was that the various state universities, the syllabi of those universities is again very much located within those states only. The cross communication or the cross analysis of writers within different states is very less. For example, the very best example which I could give is Dr. Damayanti Besras, who recently was awarded Padma Shri, and she has many works in Santhali. But again, because she writes in Alchiki, her works seldom reaches, or perhaps in the coming few years, her works will seldom reach Jharkhand. Why? Because Jharkhand is yet not ready to take up that script. And if that happens, the half of the population of this literature written in different states will remain unread. So I say that this is endangered because again, until and unless the Adivasi literature comes out of that politics of take it to a highest point, to take it up to the brim of mainstream. Because until and unless we resolve the conflicts among us, we cannot think of literature with creativity. Thank you.
Still had time that I said 5 minutes, but thank you for that very precise presentation, very focused. We will take up this along with the second presentation. We'll have a discussion after that if it's fine with everyone. So I'm very, very happy, delighted to invite Dr. Julie Banerjee Mehta to talk about a kinder Canada. I really like that, kinder Canada, especially in the situation in which we find ourselves. So over to you, Professor Julie.
Ma'am, you're on mute.
Thank you so much, Mohini. Thank you, Professor Hariharan. Many happy memories meeting you at the Canadian Studies Center conferences that were organized by Professor Shucharita Chattopadhyay and Professor Debashri Daktaray. I have a big shout out also to Anita, the speaker just before me, because you have really opened the doors for a kinder Canada for me to discuss. And I did notice this morning also, Professor Hariharan, that Professor Justin Lewis brought his own perspectives of a personal nature into his explication. So that gives me a great location. Huge thanks to Dhiman, whom I met way back in Toronto when he was a Shastri scholar of repute. He'd built up quite a reputation. And now he is putting, he's really walking the talk. This is a wonderful conference. I'm really enjoying it. And last but not the least, Mohini Pradhan, my research assistant and the copy editor of our journal on Rising Asia. Thank you, Mohini, for your time and walking us through the presentation to come. This for a kinder Canada. This exposition conversation today with you, my community of scholars, focuses on my own experiences, and the perspectives come from the lived experience on why we need a kinder Canada. Being a Canadian and having studied and worked at the University of Toronto for 14 long years, despite Canada being acknowledged as one of the less reputable, more habitable places to reside in globally, it still needs a lot of work. My argument is basically that we really don't need more legislation for that kind of equity in Canada, that kind of equality in Canada, whether we're talking about the First Nations or we are talking about the diasporic, the different diasporas of Asia and Africa, Latin America that reside in Canada, or the Middle East, which has now become a significant source of immigration. But what we need to talk about is what Nelson Mandela was arguing, as we know, during the independence of South Africa. He was trying to say during the Truth and Reconciliation debates that it is not law or the legislative arm that will make things better or more equal in South Africa. It is the changing of the heart and the mind. It is the change within that will bring the change without, in his words. Now, we will invite to the party as we go along Giorgio Agamben, our theorist, we can't ignore, in his wonderful book, States of Exception. I will be also shouting out to Slavoj Žižek, our very own Canadian theorist Anahit Dashtagar, and of course, Etienne Balibar. My two supervisors, my main supervisor, Professor Chelva Kanaganayakam, and someone who is a very renowned theorist on both the idea of epistemic violence, that is the violence on language, and the violence on land, is Professor John Edward Chamberlain. I will be referring to them too in the course of my exposition. First, I want to go through a few images so that you and I are in the same page when I speak a little bit more. So we'll run through the slides quickly. I don't want to hold us up, but Professor Hariharan, do I have till 1 o'clock? I'll try and finish earlier. So to believe in rights is to believe in defending differences. That's Michael Ignatius writing in the seminal work on human rights in Canada, The Rights Revolution. Pluralism, he says, does not mean relativism. It means humility. And in his provocative words, the founding father of the new Canadian nation, I think, brings to our attention about Canada's shrapnel-ridden multiculture. Mohini, if we start with the first slide, thank you. So, we are desperately seeking a newer kind of Canada in a globalized world, and we need that. Canada officially adopted multiculturalism as a policy since 1971. Since immigration patterns have changed, now immigrants are mostly from Africa and Asia, and this has muddied and muddled the problem a little bit more. Goes back to the idea of varna or color. More than race, I think it's color which we wear, which upsets the majority settler colony who feel that we are already wearing an arsenal in the form of our color. So despite all the documentation there is, despite all the theoretical underpinnings and the undergirding of the texts which we discuss on a daily basis in any of the Canadian classrooms at the universities, there is no getting away from the fact that theory generally doesn't translate into praxis. The same students in my class, and I will give you one example which I think opened my eyes to the problem of the present youth, who, even though they've had a university education at a place like the Alpha City of Toronto, at the University of Toronto's 3 campuses, have not yet imbibed the idea of multiculturalism. The first story I'll tell you is a lived experience during 2008. If you remember, it was a time when there were huge reparations, there were killings of the Tamils in Sri Lanka. Jaffna was burnt once again. After many burnings, this was yet another burning. Many of the students in my class, we were doing a full year course on Michael Ondaatje's novels, on his fiction. Many of the students in my class were divided. I never expected to see in the Western Academy young undergraduates coming to fisticuffs. This is what happened. The night before this class I'm talking about, Spadina Highway, part of the highway from Toronto to its suburbs, was completely blocked by young Tamilian students who were citizens of Canada, but they came as refugees or they came as immigrants from Sri Lanka at a very troubled time. They were taking the law into their hands because nobody else was taking the law into their hands to stop the killing of families that were back home where they were born in Sri Lanka. So when we went into class, we were ironically studying Michael Ondaatje's Anil's Ghost. And those of you who know that text know what a conflicted, embattled location that text is situated in. So apart from the fact that my class had Sinhalese and Tamil students, we also had about 70% of the class were Anglo-Canadians. I was surprised when I walked into the class. It was usually very exuberant, lively, good morning that struck me. But today, I walked into the class and it was as if the tension was as thick as a knife that was trying to cut through cold butter. So I was buffeting in the breeze when I think after I'd taken the attendance, one Anglo-Canadian student stood up at the back and said to me, "Why don't they take their baggage and go back home?" He was talking about the 6 Sri Lankan students who were sitting in the front of the class. I kept my cool. I looked at the Sri Lankan students. One of the Tamil young girls stood up, turned around, faced this young gentleman at the back of the class and said, "Do you know what it feels to call your grandmother and suddenly find that nobody's answering the phone, other people in the family in Jaffna, the phone lines are cut? Do you know what it feels to be in an adopted homeland and not have connection with your family, knowing that some of them were killed last week?" This was the beginning of a learning exercise for me. At the end of the class, I still remember the name of the guy. His name was Ryan Bisram. He was not even from Sri Lanka. Ryan was from, I think he was a British Guyanese student. And as he passed me by and left the class, he said, "You know what we need, ma'am? We need a kinder Canada." So I've been thinking about the kinder Canada. I've been writing about it for the last, now I think nearly 6-7 years. And this is what makes me think that though we have the best legislation in the world amongst first world nations, somewhere we are not being able to disseminate why it's so important that we look at the globalization of Canada in a way in which we treat our First Nations, our diaspora, and our settler colonies equally. Okay, the next one. So here was another instance that I quickly wanted to share. On my first day as an instructor, a professor at the University of Toronto, I was teaching in the Canadian Studies program. It was an endowed program, very prestigious, very privileged to have got it. It was the first class that was endowed by Senator Vivian Poy, the Chancellor Emerita. And I thought it would be nice to take in a bunch of samosas. It was a big class, about 100 students, and ask them their opinion about what they felt of this cultural food, which is almost a definition of South Asia. The girl in the front, later I learned she was Polish and was not very exposed to the multiculturalism of Toronto. But it proved to me again that we had not really exchanged even something as pleasurable as food to know each other's cultural values or cultural components. Her comment was to the class, "Oh my God, this smells like urine." I'll let you figure that one out. And I think it's self-explanatory how communities, even in a city like Canada, are pretty much barricaded. So they have their little picket fences around them. And how do you break these definitive spaces, these paradigms, and let people understand that the tongue is the marker of language and culture? If food becomes a marker of culture too, then these are the two easiest spaces in which cultural exchange of consciousness can work. But as I said, even in Canada, which is multicultural by definition, we have a long way to go. Next, please. So the Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau said, "There is no such thing as a model or ideal Canadian. A society which emphasizes uniformity is one which creates intolerance and hate. What the world should be seeking, and what in Canada we must continue to cherish, are not concepts of uniformity, but human values, compassion, love, and understanding." So this was the man who was one of the creators of the Multicultural Act in 1971. Next, please. So gestures towards Canadian writer, Nobel laureate Alice Munro's Small Town Histories, Little Known Neglected Canadians. And Trudeau says, "Canada will be a strong country when Canadians of all provinces feel at home in all parts of the country, and when they feel that all Canada belongs to them." Even at this basic level of Anglo-Canada, Manitoba, Winnipeg, Alberta, Saskatchewan, is not seen in the same light as Ottawa or Toronto. There you go. Next, please. So this is in the Canadian National Archives, the Canadian Multicultural Policy, and it's interesting to see that this is one of the most sought documents of undergrads who study Canadian history, Canadian culture, or in fact, in the history department at the University of Toronto, this is one of the most visited documents. Next, please. These are a few references that I thought I'd share, but it's too little time. So I'll leave this, if anybody wants this, at a later time. Next, please. So the policy of multiculturalism was implemented based on the recommendations of the Royal Commission, bilingualism and biculturalism. And that fight still goes on between the French and the English. So basically, a policy of multiculturalism was implemented to promote respect for cultural identity in diversity and grant ethnic groups the right to preserve and develop their own cultures within the Canadian society. For the last 60 years, everything legal, everything documented, recorded, but not followed. Next, please. Next. So this is a book by Neil Besundat, who's one of Canada's greatest Trinidadian writers and a critic of Canadian multiculture, because he says that it doesn't work because it works top down, and top down is not how it is disseminated. There is a lot of reservation at every point for acceptance of the other. So, you know, the alterity is visible even post-COVID, just when COVID was getting over. University of Toronto's St. George Street was plastered, the buildings, that we don't need people of color. They have brought in COVID. So that same conspiracy theory, whether it was the Chinese being blamed, other Asians being blamed, was very much on top of the list and was insulting to other nations. Next, please. Now, what is Justin Trudeau saying, the man in the center of so much controversy and who is really walking on eggshells because he might have played his cards not very wisely? So Canada, he says, has learned how to be strong, not in spite of our differences, but because of them. And going forward, that capacity will be at the heart of both our success and of what we offer the world. But, you know, it has not been translated, the talk has not been translated to the walk. So there is still new areas of work, as you know, with the Sikh problem. And for political expediency, this has caused even more problems with multiculturalism. Next, please. Next. Okay. So I wanted to share with you that I am actually speaking the truth when I tell you that this is the preparation of the final report in Gatineau. And this was a few years ago, when you have Chief Commissioner Marion Buller and Commissioners Brian Ilfosan and Aja Robinson and Michelle Ouellette, who are working on this final report. Now, this is in Justin Trudeau's time. And PM Trudeau takes a lot of credit for what he's done with the First Nations people. Now, let's see what has he done. Next, please. So this is Trudeau, who's carrying the 1,200-page genocide report in June 2019. And we know that the COVID came just afterwards. He's very proud of that. And in several interviews, he mentions that this is one of the greatest contributions that he thinks he would have made in his career. Next, please. Pamela Paul Mehta, a Mi'kmaq lawyer, activist, academic, has worked very hard to bring the First Nations feminist activism to the front line, and so that there is no misunderstanding, she goes and actually spends time in talking to students all over Canada. Next, please. So cultural memory needs to be reconfigured in terms of the question of how to remember the dead other. And we are talking about the number of Indigenous women, which is another huge concern today in Canada. And especially in British Columbia, there's a lot of interest in knowing why we have not been able to actually stop this problem. Next, please. I wanted to bring to your attention that a South Asian and Torontonian, Anglo-Canadian mixture, Sheila Bhattacharya, went and dug more information on the murdered Reena Virk. And she wrote a book, and she says that the privileges that I held as a white-skinned settler girl of South Asian and European descent accounted for my survival. I could have been arena work if I was from the indigenous community. Next, please. Filmmaker Srinivas Krishna, who's a favorite amongst many of us who do Canadian studies, talks about fighting against Canadian mainstream white indifference. And his film Masala, iconic, is just one of the many texts that I think all scholars of Canadian studies should certainly watch. Next, please. So this is the picture I wanted to leave you with in your mind about the Torontonians who brought Toronto to its heels and the Anglo-Canadians' response, which was, we really don't need this baggage here, take it home. So unless there is acceptance, thank you so much, Mohini. I think we can switch off for now. Unless we understand the importance of acceptance. So in the light of the recent UN reports and some serious, though belated soul searching upon its 155th anniversary as a nation, the razor-sharp question this conference, in a way, forces us to rethink how and what might usher in redress in the wake of a great many storms that are now buffeting Canada. The latest one is the Canada-India relationship. As we know, nobody wants to talk about it, but I thought I should at least mention it, is the Sikh-India crisis. So, conflict and reconciliation, conflict or reconciliation, or is reconciliation at all even possible? This overall view I have tried to put forth to us is a journey into reconfiguring new ways to envision a more equitable Canada, a kinder nation, a wiser state that takes the truth path and confronts its mistakes and apologies. First, to many communities that Anglo-Canada has ignored and insulted time and time again, and then finds pragmatic ways to compensate those who are hurting still. In this overview, I will say this. By drawing upon recently released reports by the UN and Canadian government agencies on acute areas of conflict between the administration and the margins, also the recent Canadian cultural production that unleashes a wealth of powerful artistic works that are inspired by the dishonesty of multiculturalism, particularly new literary works by second and third generation diasporics, as well as indigenous writers, we can't ignore that we have to change the way we think of the other. Possibly the most crucial and contested subject that will be addressed in the next decade is whether the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, that is so well documented, is so well legislated, can claim success in its attempts to right some of the wrongs of the unspeakable horrors meted out to the First Nations peoples. Here I'm talking not just the residential school system, but the killing of Indigenous women. A new StatsCan report says homicides of Indigenous women and girls result in charges of manslaughter instead of murder more often than the victims who were non-Indigenous. Red dresses are seen among the debris of a logging cut block in Fairy Creek logging area near Port Renfrew, British Columbia, as early as 2021. And this has become the icon, the red dress of indigenous women painters. A new statistics Canada report has found that homicides of indigenous women and girls are less likely to result in the most serious murder charges than cases in which victims were non-indigenous. What has been neglected, however, and kept hidden from public purview is shocking new evidence from last year, which interestingly points to the terror unleashed on white and Black Canadians, Germans, Italians, Ukrainians, and as a 2017 United Nations Human Rights Council report states, African Canadians who are treated like subhumans in Nova Scotia. It's taken close to 60 years for us to acknowledge in Canada that we have been egregious in our treatment of Blacks, which exacerbates the stench of an already pockmarked fabric of divisive, disseminated, demoralized racist Canada, usually called out for its appalling injustices with the Chinese head tax, the Japanese internment, and the Kumagatamaru incidents over a century and more. So, my interest in the declassification of the evidence and recent investigations moving away just from the Asian diasporic texts of the abominable treatment of Black Canadians and the partial attempts by the administration to compensate the Black community will hopefully further the conversation on conflict and resolution, further than the First Nations. The United Nations officials write in their report, history informs anti-Black racism and racial stereotypes that are so deeply entrenched in institutions, policies, and practices that its institutional and systemic forms are either functionally normalized or rendered invisible, especially to the dominant group. This contemporary form of racism replicates the historical conditions and effects of spatial segregation, economic disadvantage, and social recommendations to redress past and present wrongs affecting African Canadians. The first among which calls on the Canadian government to apologize for slavery and consider issuing reparations. Not yet done. The working group said many city officials in different places employed deplorable tactics to displace Africville's Black residents. When the neighborhood was razed in the late 1960s, marking a dark period in inverted commas in Nova Scotian history, the city offered a formal apology in 2010, allocated just $3 million to build a monument, a museum on the state, which members of the working group welcomed as a recognition of its significance to the African Nova Scotian community. Socio-economic conditions, they said, and the provincial government confessed, fell short in its efforts to establish land titles for the descendants of the Black peoples. The authors appealed to the federal government to provide financial support to help claimants cover the costs involved in resolving land and disputes regarding land. Of course, that echoes and chimes very strongly with what happened to the Japanese community. And the disempowered Japanese, 22,000 of them, could not come back. There was nowhere to come back to because their homes, their land was given away. What I think we need to remember is that between 2005 and 2015, the number of Black inmates in federal prisons rose by more than 71%. How much time do I have, Professor Hariharan? Good, wonderful. So the government will not grant financial compensations for the requests made. This was actually a comment by Sheila Finestone, Secretary of State for Multiculturalism in the late 1990s. She said, "We wish we could rewrite history. We wish we could relive the past, but we cannot. We believe our only choice lies in using limited government resources to create a more equitable society now and a better life for generations to come." And she's talking about the African Canadian families. It is the same story as we know with the Chinese, with the Japanese internment. And it is a very personal story I'll leave you with as to how Canada needs to be kinder. In my class, I had a topper. She was a Japanese Canadian, ethnically fully Japanese, third generation, Emily Yamashita. In our explication and exposition with Oba-san, part of the text in the Canadian Studies program, she told the class that two of her mamas, her mother's brothers, who were in the internment camp, came back but could not face being pointed out by Anglo-Canadians as, "Oh my God, these people were in the internment camp." And you know, the Japanese idea of shame, giri and gimi, is so strong. So this was only one case which I'd share with you. Suicides were rampant. And I want to bring Marianne Hirsch to the table and leave her there for you to think about, where she talks about post-memory and how the trauma post the internment camp translated and still translates into suicides among young Japanese Canadians. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Julie, for that excellent recounting of ever so many narratives. I must say that the whatever you were trying to articulate, present, did weave in a whole lot of colors to the kind of concerns that Dr. Anita had also raised. Generally, what we have been listening to is this larger question of language and the way in which we use language, the language that, for example, that we have on the board, and that ability to listen with our eyes and with our ears, which is what would make us human. It is a change within that will bring the change without, as Mandela put it, which was so apt, I must say, that would aptly would describe the whole session and perhaps what we have been deliberating for 1.5 days. Now we still have half a day more. That is why I said 1.5 days. But the the key concerns that were flagged in a way to adopt that favorite metaphor that has been doing the rounds, the circle. I think we are adding more rounds to it. Perhaps we have to talk about not just circle of stories, but a concentric ring of stories. Perhaps that would be more apt. And the crucial thing where both of you try to emphasize was this ethic of remembering. Though you did talk about the murdered women, but how do you remember a language? And how do you recognize a language? These become, I think, very crucial concerns, very crucial questions. These are the kind of things that I learn by listening to you. And of course, this big question, which you also did indicate, the standoff that we have between India and Canada, I think it's very important that we do pay more than a lip service to it. I think personally what I feel is this, it's a question of two nations looking at each other and trying to figure out who's going to blink first. Now, I don't think that's going to solve any problem. I've always maintained that it doesn't really help to solve a problem by staring at the other person and trying to figure out who's going to outstare who. And perhaps this is not a diplomatic way in which you can talk about this, but I feel that there needs to be more than a diplomatic way, a human way of talking about it. So on that note, I would like to leave the floor open for discussion. Perhaps we can have questions, comments, maybe 2 questions, or 2.5 questions. We'll make 2.5. Okay, fine. Shoot.
Thank you so much, Julie. We have a student who would probably.
My question is for Julie ma'am. Good morning ma'am, I'm Mehta. I am pursuing masters at the Center of Comparative Literature under Vishwa Bharati. Thank you for your remarkable presentation. Your insights from your personal life were truly inspiring. Ma'am, your speech took me back to your seminar at the American Center in Kolkata, where you gave a speech on women who are writing on the immigrant experiences. There, as today also you mentioned the Indian food, the discrimination against the food, or how our spices or flavors of food are discriminated, or the noses are scrunched up by others. And I remember in that conference, or seminar rather I would say, you mentioned that in the Interpreter of Maladies by Jhumpa Lahiri, food brought a nostalgic idea, a connection to the homeland. But now, in recent times, we see that many Indians, not many, some Indians themselves crunch up their nose on their food. They don't like their own food, or remark discrimination against their own food. Is it because of the discrimination they faced in the past, or by their fellow colleagues or friends? What are your insights on that?
Debusmita, that's a very interesting question, and it brings up many issues about alterity and discrimination. I think in a way, if you've read Naipaul's Mimic Men, you know, Bhabha also talks about this. The issue of us as brown people feeling in many ways that we are unacceptable unless we change. So let me put you in perspective. A friend of ours went to Canada in summer. I think within the second year we were there, from Kolkata. And you know, in summer in Canada, we make barbecue, whether it's steaks or whether it's lamb chops or whether it's whatever it is. The whole air is filled with the smell of meat being roasted in people's backyards. That's cultural Canada for you. And the comment she made, I will never forget. এখানে কি সব জায়গায় crematorium আছে? So, you know, the smell of roasting human flesh in her mind came to the fore when she smelt that smell of the steak on the barbecue. So when you say that Indians loathe their own food now, this is of course not to do with answering your question, but it came to mind, so I'm sharing with you. It is so pathetic. What you say is true, because it's not just in Canada that I find that young Indians want to show that they're upwardly mobile. Their parents want them to acculturate quicker. So they deny their own food. Mothers don't have time to cook. They're probably working two jobs to keep their lives together, to put food on the dal chal on the table. So often it is pasta. If you open the lunch boxes of students, you will find it is pasta. Because if you go to look for homes with a realtor, nobody wants to rent a flat to an Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi family. Do you know why? Because they say our food smells. ওই যে মাছ ভাজার গন্ধ, ওইটাকে বলে, don't, if you can promise that you won't cook smelly food, then you can rent a house. So you're absolutely right. Some of it is to do with wanting to cut your roots because you are seen to be one of them, or to look at it from the perspective of Anglo-Canadian, very few, maybe 0.05% of Canadians only in the major cities would be exposed to that kind of culture. Does that answer your question?
Ma'am, absolutely.
Yeah,
Thank you,
online,
ma'am.
if there's a question online, please. Yeah.
Hello, ma'am. My question is primarily to Julie, ma'am. If Anita, ma'am, also answers to this, I would be glad also. So, both of your presentations directed towards the debate of politics of center and peripheries in different levels. Taking cognizance of the shifting dimensions of this debate, my question is, how do you conceptualize self and the other in this age of multiculturalism, where the self also becomes victim of relentless otherization process?
Okay. I already said that in the speech that self and the other for me, which I tried to write my research but I could not. I see myself as the other self. That is both lives in me. Why? Because I have inherited a culture which I am not living, which I am enjoying occasionally. So at some point of time, I can associate myself with that very culture, and at the same times, I detach myself from that culture. So there is also attachment, there is also detachment, and that is how I have seen this my community. I have seen my culture. I have seen my people, and I have seen my literature. That uh, sometimes it makes you detach yourself from it, and sometimes it makes you very much attached with the culture. Which I can say that at the very point of time, at the present, now while even giving answering, I can make all the listeners dance with my music, with my song. I can have that ability because that is my inherent culture. That the songs, the rhythms, can without even understanding, you can dance to it. But again, there are certain things which make me think and overthink. That these are also the things which I have inherited because since you are born with unquestionably you everything comes the pros and cons of a culture will always be attached with you, whether you deny it or you accept it, it will always be connected with you. So I see myself as the other self. For example, I'll give you very interesting good examples. Like I again like I biracially I'm a proto-astroloid. By linguistically, I'm an Astroasiatic, which means I'm speaking here. People have invited me because I have that intellect. I have gained that ability. I am Anita Hembrom. I am giving a speech. On the other hand, we have the Mashi working in the center. She is the other self of mine, which I will seldom associate at the given situation. So that is the thing that I see myself as the other self and also the self. The mainstream, the culture is always will be within me, and it will always detach me and attach me with things.
Professor Hariharan, may I have a quick, very
Please,
quick
please.
um,
Yes,
insertion there?
yes.
Okay, so most of you would have read Obasan by Joy Kogawa. There are many reasons I keep going back to that text to teach it and to discuss it. You know, there is a point where Stephen, the brother of Naomi, asks the father, and what is it? Why does Canada look at us? Are we really the enemy? And the father, Nakasone, says, no, we are the enemy and we are not the enemy. So I think if you remember Professor Himani Banerjee's keynote yesterday, she said so beautifully, she invoked the saying, the victim is also sometimes the murderer. There is this doppelganger. You know, the modernists probably did it best with Eliot all through the wasteland. You know, there's always the self and the other. So the perception of the self is how the other looks at you. And your perception of yourself is also how you look at the other. Do you see what I'm saying? There's a duality there, which is constantly at work in whatever way we engage with the other. Thank you.
Very quick.
Sorry, just taking the liberty. We are running really late. It reminded me of Makeda Silvera and Shani Muthu as well, Julidi. Out
Yes.
on Main Street and Sushila's Bhakti, that short story collection. They walk
Yes.
into a store and they say, can we have some prasad, please? That is one thing.
Yeah.
And of course, this entire idea of needing mehendi. So the
Yeah.
olfactory becomes very important to evoke the land which they left, which they don't
Yes.
belong to, which they're trying
Yes.
to adopt in a different land. So the
Yes.
identity, homeland, which are intrinsic to Canadian literature, especially
Yeah.
South Asian and settler literature, is something
Yes.
which is very important, which you have actually provoked us. These plenaries have been quite provocative, I should say, in many ways. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Diman, you know that I can never eat a chom chom anymore without thinking of Shani Muthu's Out on Main Street.
Okay. We've been talking about literature from Canada, from India, from the Santal language, and for a strange reason, a thought came to my mind. I have tweaked a line from a poem, which is an American poem. We have not referred to the United States. So I would like to sum up the entire discussion with this line. We are large, we contain multitudes. I think it's a very simple understanding, but it's a profound statement, line from Walt Whitman. So before I wind up, I would like to thank Julie Mehta particularly for bringing in the name of a very, very dear friend, Chelva. It was not nostalgia, there was something more to it. It was so affectionate person.
Yes.
So thanks for that. And when Anita made her presentation, I was also reminded of the way in which the states in India were organized and reorganized, and we keep organizing and reorganizing states in India, and the big debate that we have had, and this whole question of sub-identities that she was talking about, and the multiple scripts and the whole problematic. And she was particularly talking about the crisis in the literature. But I would like to quote another American who comes to my mind, none other than Frank Kermode, who in his very classic series of lectures which were published sometime in the 50s, The Sense of an Ending,
Yes.
where he has a beautiful line, the crisis makes us human. I would like to wind up the whole session by saying that, by trying to emphasize what Kermode had said some 70 years ago, that the crisis makes us human. I think that's a discovery. The dishonesty of multiculturalism, as you so beautifully put it, probably gives us an opportunity. And maybe it's time that we learn how to be human. So I take this opportunity to thank both the plenary speakers and the department. Yeah, she will do that, but I would like to do it as a chair. Yeah. Oh. Oh, you want to say something? Please. Please.
Anita ma'am, I would like to thank you for appreciating for the sketch, but it is just an add-on note to what I. It is just an add-on note to what I said about the sketch. So it would be really an injustice if I don't thank Kostobda, our senior MA second year student, who made all the required modifications, and he inspired me to do the work. So it is wrong to take the credit alone. So I would like to thank him.
Yeah. Exactly, exactly.
Thank
So
you, sir.
congratulations for that, because that really captures the spirit of the conference, and so that's great. So thank you all. Thank you for having me here to share this. It truly has been a spiritual journey for me, as I said yesterday. So thank you very much. Thanks, Diman. Thank you.
Thank you again, Dhiman. Thank you, Professor Hariharan.
Thank you, Professor Hariharan, and thank you to the speakers. The fifth academic session will begin right away, and I request Srimati Suparna Mondol to take over the session as chair. Srimati Suparna Mondol is currently pursuing her PhD at the Center for Comparative Literature, Vishwabharati. She has completed her Masters in Comparative Literature from Jadavpur University. For this session, we have Shri Nandini Mukherjee, Shri Nakshatra Sengupta, Srimati Tanushree Bashak, and Srimati Srishti Rai as speakers. Over to you, Suparna.